Have you done any board breaker tier list yet? This should answer your question. This is what we're doing next. Where is Nibiru on the board breaker tier list? God damn. Also, why is there Kurikara? Kurikara is obviously a hand trap. Obviously. YouTube, welcome to another discussion of post Cyberstorm Axis format. This time around we're doing board breakers / power spells / you know what. We've already done hand traps. If you've missed that video, the link is going to be in the description down below, and I'm gonna try and discuss which of these cards are viable after Cyberstorm Axis, which ones you want to play, and against which decks they are useful. Once again, I've said the same thing in the hand trap discussion, but this has the little caveat that, first of all, I'm also very new to the format in terms of like Cyberstorm Axis testing, and also I'm making this discussion before we know if there's a potential ban list anytime soon. We're in this weird spot where we don't know if we get a ban list. Actually, I'm gonna re-record this if there's a ban list. So if you're seeing this, there has not been a ban list yet. So I'm doing this under the assumption that even though Super Heavy Samurai and Purely and other decks are gonna enter the format, for the most part, we're still gonna have Kashtira, Runic variations, Sprite variations, Branded, those kind of decks in the format as well. So this is not just against Super Heavy Samurai and Purely, but also against the other decks in the meta. Book of Moon is a card that is decent right now alongside Book of Eclipse. Both of these cards are seeing a very decent amount of play right now. I think they're gonna obviously become a little bit worse with the new set because they are very good against Kashtira, but that's the main reason to play them. So if the next set introduces more decks into the format where the cards aren't that good, then that might be a problem. Booking is not that good against Super Heavy Samurai, and it's also not that good against Purely. So whatever it is that they are right now, which I would argue that they are very solid choices right now, they become a little bit worse, but they're still decent. It depends a little bit on how popular Kashtira is after the new set. The specific reason why I don't like them against Purely and Super Heavy Samurai is against Super Heavy Samurai, if you go second, the books are basically dead cards. Against Purely, they can just rank up into Noir and that's unaffected. You stop them from drawing some cards if you book in the draw phase before they can activate in standby phase. So they're actually not that bad against Purely going second. Actually, maybe they're okay against Purely. Maybe I'll put them up higher for specific matchups. How do I phrase this? Against Kashtira, the current standard, the gold standard for Book of Moon is that, or Book of Eclipse, is that if it resolves against Kashtira, you have a very high chance of winning the game because it's that good, right? Going first and second. Against Purely and Super Heavy Samurai, that's not the case. It's like, even going first, you can use it, but it's not that good. It's just like, okay. I don't think these cards are gonna remain the same strength that they are right now. Let's talk about effect negation. Dark Ruler, I think, becomes a good card next format. The problem that I have, that I'm running into right now, is that I don't know if there's even any board breaker on here that is just straight up really good against every deck. Because this is one of the problems with like super diverse formats. Most of these cards have some matchups where they're not very good. Like Dark Ruler No More is very good against Super Heavy Samurai. But in most other matchups, I don't think the card is that strong. Like against Purely, it's very bad. Against Kashtira, it doesn't do that much. I guess it's okay against Kashtira, but for the most part, in the other matchups, the card is not very good. The card does not see play right now, but it will be very good against Super Heavy Samurai. So I expect this card to see side deck play at minimum. I don't know if it's good enough to main deck. Chalice is mediocre. Very low impact. You would rather have hand traps in the matchups where you would want this card. It's not very good. Droplet is mediocre. I can't think of matchups where Droplet is super strong. Like, it's good against Super Heavy Samurai because you can negate their stuff, but the problem is they make so many different monsters that you have to send so many cards. Like, you have to send 4 cards because they make like Appaloosa, Savage, Barone, Regulus. You need to send like everything. You need to send your entire hand away, right? And then at the same time, you can also just not main deck the card in an environment where there's like Kashtira, so the card is not very good. Stealing effects like Change of Heart, Mind Control are decent, I think. Specifically good against like Kashtira. Against Super Heavy Samurai, they're not very good. Against Purely, they're not very good. So I don't think you're gonna main deck these cards, but they're like all right maybe to side deck. But this is mostly because in general, I don't like board breakers with Super Heavy Samurai and Purely in the mix. Like, both of the new decks make it so board breakers pretty much suck against them because Purely is unaffected and Super Heavy Samurai can negate all your board breakers except for Dark Ruler No More. So all these kind of power spells are just in a very tough spot. Something that solves that issue is cards that tribute your opponent's stuff, I think that is going to be a solid option, depending on what deck you play, of course. Because not every deck can play each of these. But I think Kurikara is very solid against Purely. It's very solid against Kashtira, of course. It can also be okay against Super Heavy Samurai. Of course, Super Heavy Samurai has a lot of interruptions, so you need to play into those interruptions to use Kurikara. So you're gonna use Kurikara last, but it can still work, right? You contribute their like Barone, Appaloosa, and their Savage if you were able to force their negates, and then you can like attack them for like a bazillion damage and revive Barone in the end phase or something. It can work. I think that's the only concept that is actually good enough to just see play in the main deck, because it's good against enough decks, right? And what you play depends on your deck, right? Like there's some decks that can play Lava Golem in Sphere mode. Some decks need their normal summon, so they need to play Kaiju's, Kurikara, or Santa Claus. By the way, just very quick, it's one of the most asked questions is like, why do people play Santa Claus over Kaiju's? This is a thing that's very specific in Purely. In Purely, you play Santa Claus because it's smaller and it can be summoned in defense. So you can give it to your opponent, and in defense position, you can like make a very big Zeus because you can keep attacking into it with happiness. Or you can turn it to attack position with, I think Beauty is the one. There's a memory spell that makes a monster this turn unable to be destroyed by battle. So you can actually OTK over Santa Claus. This is why everyone in the OCG is playing Santa Claus in Purely and not Kaiju's. The other decks are probably always going to prefer Kaiju's, but Purely prefers Santa Claus, which is why it's in here. Tributing your opponent's stuff is very good. Whether you want to main deck that or side deck that, I'm not sure yet, but those cards are very valuable in the next format, I think. But that's a very good way of dealing with all kinds of decks. Keep in mind that specifically against Purely, if you do one of these things, tributing your opponent's stuff in the main phase will let them draw a lot of stuff in your standby, so you're not preventing that. Also, I think I should move Sphere Mode and Lava Golem down a little bit, because there's a few decks that don't summon multiple monsters. Like sometimes Purely only ends on one monster, so you can't Lava Golem them. Sometimes Kashtira plays around these by making a Rise Hard pass. So those types of things make these cards a little bit more risky than the ones that tribute only one monster. So a little more hesitant to put these two into guaranteed very good category, but they're okay. Removal, I think, is mediocre. Like, removal in the sense of Raigeki and Darkhole. I don't see a reason to play these cards over other cards. If I'm playing a card that's already only good going second, I'm picking something that tributes my opponent's stuff rather than that, because it doesn't work against Barone negates, Savage negates, Regulus from Super Heavy Samurai. It doesn't work against Purely because it's unaffected. It doesn't work against the Infinitrack Goliath as a material under a Rise Hard. It's just like very mediocre. The only reason I'm putting Lightning Storm higher is because I don't think that Labyrinth is going to completely disappear. So back row removal is going to be playable in the side deck. Two cards that are only on here because of Purely: Herald of the Abyss and XYZ Encore. I think Herald of the Abyss is a pretty cool card. So if you don't know why this card is on here, Herald of the Abyss lets you declare a card, attribute, and type, and your opponent has to send one of those cards that they control to the graveyard. What this specifically does is it gets around cards that are unaffected by card effects, because you force your opponent to do it. So it's not the card effect that is affecting the card, it's the player that it affects. So you can Herald of the Abyss the X Purely Noir that is unaffected by activated effects. That's the reason why people play Herald of the Abyss, and that's a solid reason. I don't think it's going to be like a mainstay. I can see some people play it as a one-off with Thrust. Other than that, I don't really think people are going to main deck the card, but it's an okay side deck card. And then XYZ Encore is kind of like the same thing. It's a card that's very specific against Purely. I don't like it in other matchups. It's only really good against Purely. The cool thing about it is that, opposed to like Kaiju's, Kurikara, Herald of the Abyss, is that you can do it in draw phase because it's a quick play spell, so you stop them from drawing. So I think specifically against Purely, this card is decent. Like, people in the OCG have been using this card, so I think it has potential. I'm just not sure if you want to play a card that's only good against one deck, because I predict the meta to be very, very diverse, and I'm not sure if I'm willing to put a card into my side deck that's only good for one matchup. It's good into a Rise Pass. It might be okay against Kashtira, yeah. I'm not sure. You have to try the card to see whether it's good against Kashtira. I'm not sure. There's definitely better cards against Kashtira. Otherwise, people would already be playing the card, so. Enemy controller actually, I think, goes into this category. I don't see enemy controller seeing play next format. Might actually be mediocre. I don't really see it. Unfortunately, I like enemy controller a lot. I'm a big fan of the card, but I don't think we're going to see enemy controller be a thing simply because card sucks against Purely. Card sucks against Super Heavy Samurai. I don't think it's worth playing. Another card that, in my opinion, takes a huge hit in Cyberstorm Axis format is Evenly Matched. I think out of this entire list, the most played card right now in a lot of decks, in runic decks and all that stuff, you always play evenly right now. I think that's going to change with Cyberstorm Axis for two reasons. The first reason is people are going to play hand traps. If you evenly match someone, chances are they're going to keep an important piece on the field and then hand trap you in main phase 2, so you might not even be able to break it. And the second reason is, in general, there's just two new decks that this card is very bad against. Like against Purely, this card does clear some stuff, but it doesn't deal with the main problems. Like Purely just keeps Noir and has a bunch of cards in hand, has super good follow-up, you just lose to that. Super Heavy Samurai, they have like 3 Omni Negates, so you are way better off just playing hand traps instead of Evenly Matched. I don't think Evenly is going to be a main deck card anymore if Purely and Super Heavy Samurai see competitive play, which I think they will. It's definitely still a decent side deck card, but you're not going to be able to main deck it. If you want to cover for runic decks, labyrinth decks, those kind of stuff, you can side Evenly Matched. You can even side it against Kashtira if you want to, but in the main deck, I think we're going to gravitate more towards hand traps and other board breakers than Evenly Matched. As a like board breaker slash tech card, I like Fenrir every time it comes up because it is a card that works going first and second, which is something that's not true for like Kurikara, Santa Claus, Kaijus, Dark Ruler, Evenly, those types of cards. However, I think Fenrir is only a decent card next format because going second against Super Heavy Samurai, one Fenrir ain't gonna do shit. But if you pair it up with other board breakers, it's okay. But I'm not sure if that makes it good enough to be played. Pankratops is mediocre. Maybe you can side deck it, but I don't like it. I don't love the card. Super Poly, hold up, let me think. Is there a fusion you can make against Super Heavy Samurai? You can fuse Appaloosa and Barone into Mud Dragon at the cost of 2 cards. They still have Savage Regulus. I guess the problem here is that I'm not sure if every single Super Heavy Samurai player is going to make the same end board, right? There could definitely be some players that decide to make a different end board, and then, you know, you're kind of sad. Some of them also play Spell Canceller to beat Dark Ruler. I think especially post-side, that's going to be a common thing because they can search Spell Canceller. Yeah, I don't think you should be playing Super Poly. It seems too risky for my liking. Ultimate Slayer is probably the same. I like Ultimate Slayer. It really hurts to put it there, but I don't see an application for it. Doesn't do anything against Purely because it's unaffected. Against Super Heavy Samurai, it clears one thing, but then you still have to deal with the other things, and that's a problem. Against Kashtira, it's obviously not useful. So as much as I like the card in general, I don't think this is the time for it. Trust me, chat. Trust me, there is going to be a time for Ultimate Slayer, but it's not now. All right, and then we have 2 powerhouses left. We have Talents and Thrust. In general, very good cards. I would say it's this way around. Like, I think Talents is a very good card. There's only one exception to Talents, and that's going second against Super Heavy Samurai. The card I don't think is good enough. Going first, I think Talents is going to be a very strong card because people are going to be playing more hand traps. Even against Purely, that deck has a lot of hand traps, and going second, yes, this card does not kill the X Purely Noir, but it draws you 2 cards still. It's still a powerful card, right? You're still going to be able to use it. And I think when there's a format where you can almost always activate Triple Tactics Talents because people play a lot of hand traps, I just can't help but put this card into very good. Like, this card is just very good. I'm mainly afraid of getting drolled and Talents being kind of dead. True, but I mean, you still have the 2 other effects of Talents, right? You can still use it to shuffle from their hand into the deck or steal a card. I think it's just good. Thrust, on the other hand, I think in general is only a decent card because I don't like Thrust against hand traps when you go first. The only exception to that, in my opinion, is in Purely, because Purely has a very good trap target for Thrust, which is Purely Leap. I like that when Purely gets like Effect Veilered or Ashed or whatever, you can just Thrust for Purely Leap, and that's cool. So I think in Purely, Thrust is good. In other decks, just play talents. I don't know if you want to play both. You just really hate your life if you go first and you get effect veilered and you have like thrust in your hand, and then all you can do is like set an impermanence or something like that. I don't like that. There's a few decks where you can play thrust, but in general, I think talents is just the better card in hand trap formats. So there's that. Since we have put nothing in bad, I think there is a difference in quality here between these cards. So I'll put these in bad because I think these 4 are better than these. So just to make a distinction, I'm gonna move those down. And I think that's a fair ranking. I think you can really notice the difference between my last format ranking, where I valued a lot of these board breakers relatively highly. The format really shifts, I think, away from board breakers in general. We are gonna be on hand traps a lot more than board breakers in this upcoming format. I still think there is a lot of merit to playing some hand traps with a couple board breakers. You can play like 9 or 12 hand traps and then you still want, I think, some amount of board breakers, especially in side deck. I still think we're going to see some Dark Ruler, some Evenly, some Encore, some back row removal. Those cards have definitely a spot in side decks alongside Lava Golem, Sphere Mode. Those cards are going to be played, just not main decked. I think the only ones I really think about main decking right now are the ones up here. Let me know if you agree. Let me know what you think of this list. Let me know what you are going to play in the next format post Cyberstorm Axis. What are you expecting to be top tier decks? Until then, I hope you enjoyed the video, YouTube. If you did, subscribe to the channel to support it. I appreciate that if you do that. And yeah, until next time, I'll see you then, and have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.